Welcome to the Carl Jackson Show. This is your daily, well, in this case, your weekly dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. Guys, we got a bang-up show for you today. Lots to get to. We're going to talk about the deep state and how they, in fact, the CIA, as a matter of fact, decided to literally haunt Trump, if you will, way before 2016 and literally go after some of the people that were associated with his campaign at the time. More details have emerged on that. But before I get to that, I've been wanting to interview this guest for quite some time, and I think you're absolutely going to enjoy her. You've seen her on TV, you've seen her on Fox, you've heard her in other interviews, and she's a hero. She's an Air Marshal whistleblower, but she's also the head of, or the executive director for the Air Marshal National Council. She's the executive director of the Air Marshal National Council. Her name is Sonya Hightower Labosco. Sonya, welcome to the Carl Jackson Show.
Carl, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on this morning.
Absolutely. Okay, so first, Sonya, let's get to this. Obviously, you were a whistleblower for the Air Marshal Service. Talk to us about that quickly.
Well, Carl, in 2019, when we were working, we were assigned within the Transportation Security Administration. So the Air Marshals is a very small component inside this large bureaucratic 70,000 plus administrative agency. So when they took the law enforcement component and put us inside TSA, we were concerned because, number one, TSA is a very left-leaning, they're a very woke agency, and we knew that their administrative policies were going to hamper or try to handcuff the Air Marshals from doing our job. So that was the biggest issue that we had, is because we knew that we were going to be nestled underneath this really not good group of people at TSA.
Man, you know what? And it's funny. It's funny that you say that, because I have been curious about the TSA. I got to be honest with you, Sonya. I don't know how effective the TSA are. I mean, obviously, you would be an expert in that. I wouldn't. But listen, I understand how Israeli security works when it comes to their airlines, the TSA, from what I understand, and I may be far off from this, but from what I've read, I mean, literally, there are so many threats that are able to make it through the TSA that is unreal. Am I off on that? Is there fantasy when it relates to that?
No, Carl, you're not off. It's a lot of security theater. I call it the paper tiger. It all looks great on paper. And you got to look, TSA, it's not about security. It's about contracts and getting billions and billions of dollars worth of equipment. So at the end of the day, what you see at the airport is like going to the big show. It's something that you see and you think, wow, they're doing a great job. But behind the scenes, it's all these steering committees for the railroads, for the airlines, for these private industries. So it is definitely a paper tiger.
How long were you an Air Marshal?
12 years. I did 12 years at Daytona Beach Police Department as a midnight shift sergeant, and then I came over straight after 9/11 and served here in the Orlando field office.
Wow. Well, thank you for your service. We definitely appreciate that. You know, I read something that I did not realize, and again, we're talking to my guest, Sonya Hightower Labosco. She is the executive director for the Air Marshal National Council. I didn't know this, Sonya, but I read that Air Marshals used to be on every flight back in, what was it, in the 60s. I had no idea. And now you're down to 5%, or actually fewer than 5% of flights. I assumed that the Air Marshals weren't on flights until after 9/11. I don't know how I didn't know that, but love to hear you speak to that.
Yeah, Carl, we have a long history. The Air Marshals were actually, President John F. Kennedy actually saw a need in 1961 for the program because of all the hijackings that they had then. Usually it was just a political statement that someone would hijack an aircraft and go to another country. So he started the Air Marshal program, which was called Civil Aviation Specialist, back in 1962. There were 18 volunteers from Customs and Border Patrol that volunteered to be in the Air Marshal program at that time. But over the years, it grew to where there was every flight in the United States with an American flag carrier had an air marshal on it, or teams of air marshals. So there was no flight in the late 60s, early 70s that did not have an air marshal. Every air carrier was assigned a team of air marshals, and he really did it right. In the early part of this program, it was done to what I would say a standard that we need in today's world. We don't have air marshals on the plane right now, Carl. We're not doing the job that we were commissioned to do after 9/11. We don't even recognize the mission we're doing today.
Yeah, and that's absolutely terrifying to me, given the threats that we see coming across the border, which we'll get to shortly, and after obviously what we all witnessed on 9/11. That absolutely baffled me. Let me ask you this: what happened to change the course of air marshals being on every flight, then down to approximately 5% of flights, which I saw you mention on another show?
Well, what happened over the years, because the hijackings, the political hijackings came to a halt. So what does the government do when they say, oh, well, none of these problems are happening again, we're going to just gut this program? So what they did is they gutted the program in the late 80s and in the 90s. We know after the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, there were only 33 air marshals at that time. If that wasn't an indicator to the United States that we needed to look at the aviation domain, because they had information back in 1993 that the World Trade Centers were a target and they were bombed, we didn't do anything to beef up our air marshal program then. Of course, we waited till after 9/11, and then we had 33 air marshals at that time. And unfortunately, 2,977 people were murdered.
Yeah, it's such a sad state. Now, here's something that I'd like to bring to the audience's attention, and I didn't know this. I gazed over it last night, reading through some material, and then you reminded me of it earlier. But you played a major role in getting Mayorkas impeached.
You better believe it, and I'm very proud of that. I helped get that impeachment, the Air Marshal National Council did. We gathered information and evidence for 3 years and supplied to Congress in regards to the fraud, waste, abuse, and the things that were going on within TSA at the hand of Mayorkas. And not only are we're not going to stop with Mayorkas, TSA Administrator David Pekoske needs to be next.
Why do you say that?
Because he is working hand in glove with DHS to cripple the air marshal program. He has taken air marshals off of flights at the request of Benny Thompson. After January the 6th, Benny Thompson sent a letter to TSA Pekoske, and with one letter, Benny Thompson said, I want you to target the white supremacists and the domestic terrorists that were at the Capitol on January the 6th. But there was no vetting of anyone that was on the flight manifest that went into the National Capital Region. So with one letter, TSA Administrator David Pekoske absolutely changed our entire deployment mission strategy and sent us following January 6ers without any type of criminal investigation whatsoever. So that individual, David Pekoske, needs to go.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned this. I've been able to interview both Kyle Seraphin and Stephen Friend, FBI whistleblowers, and I mean they say just as much with the when it comes to the FBI, how their mission changed and how they were, all of a sudden they were looking for white domestic terrorists and all this kind of stuff. And, after 9/11, the FBI had done a good job of kind of weeding out terrorists, just as the Air Marshal Service had done. These terrorist threats had slowed down. And so then the FBI began to focus or refocus on domestic terrorists, and then with J6, obviously with left-wing bureaucrats being inside of these agencies, okay, well, let's make white Americans, or especially white Christian Americans and males, the real threat, when that's not the truth whatsoever. Would you feel safe flying today, Sonya? I mean, just on a personal note, would you feel safe flying today?
I would not allow. I used to let my children fly. You know how they would fly alone, and you could have, the gate person could stay with them during the entire flight. I wouldn't do that today. I would not allow anyone on my family to fly unless I was there, because I know that I could take some type of actions that others may not, and I might be able to see a threat that they can't. So I will fly, and I'll let my family fly, but only if they're with me.
Wow. Okay. My jaw drops. That says a lot. That question just popped into my mind. I was like, you know what? I want to hear from her. Let me circle back. We only have a minute left in this segment, but Sonya Labosco, she's going to stay with us again. She's the executive director for the Air Marshal National Council. Mayorkas, there are people that told me, or things that I've read, well, Mayorkas, he didn't necessarily need to be impeached, or if he were to be impeached, listen, they'll just get somebody else. And listen, I don't even know if this guy is going to get kicked out of office because the Senate ultimately has to make that call. But I'm glad the House did it. But what would you say to those that say, listen, they'll just get another left winger in? It doesn't matter that Mayorkas is impeached.
It does matter. It matters because we have to take action, Carl. We know that this is happening. We have to use the powers that we have from the people to show that we're not going to stand down and we're not going to be quiet. So Mayorkas is a rotten apple. He needs to go. And bottom line is he's impeached.
I absolutely love it. Again, my guest, Sonya Hightower Labosco, the executive director of the Air Marshal National Council. We're going to have much more coming up with Sonya, so much more that I would like to get to. We'll talk about the borders, more on the TSA, DEI infecting our airlines. It's absolutely insane. All of that and more coming up with Sonya Labosco. We'll be back. Welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. Again, I'm joined by my guest, Sonya Hightower Labosco. She is the executive director of Air Marshal National Council. Sonya, let me ask you, I'm just curious, where did the nickname Hightower come from?
That is my maiden name.
Is it really? Okay.
That was my maiden name, and it's kind of funny because I was a midnight shift sergeant in Daytona. So Officer Hightower from the movie Police Academy. So I used to get that. I said, "Hey, can't you tell that was my big brother? I mean, don't we look alike?"
All right, I didn't. Good story. I did not know that. So, all right. Anyway, all right. So before we went to the break. Again, we were talking about the TSA. We were talking about the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas that has just been impeached, thanks in large part to the Air Marshal National Council and yourself. So we're very appreciative of that. Again, listen, we don't know if this guy is going to be removed from office, but I tell you why I think this is a good thing as well, that he has been impeached, because I think it puts the onus on the Democrat Party to defend this guy leading up to the 2024 election. And I think that will be a bad move for Senate Democrats to do that and to not follow through and remove this guy from office. But nonetheless, it's on record. That blight will never go away. It's been nearly 150 years since a cabinet member of an administration has been impeached. So anyway, great job on that. Let me get to this border issue, Sonya. Now, you guys were you're air marshals. You're put in the sky in airplanes to protect passengers and protect citizens, and then all of a sudden, the air marshals are ordered to stand guard on the border. And this makes absolutely no sense to me. How did you take that news?
Oh, it was not pretty. The minute that we knew that DHS and TSA, Mayorkas and Pekoski were going to remove the air marshals out of the aircraft and put us on the border, of course, the council, we started fighting. We filed complaints with the Office of Inspector General. We went to Congress. We were sounding the whistle. We went to the public and the media because we couldn't get anybody to understand we're a very small workforce and we're very specially highly trained to work in a linear environment to thwart a hijacking. There's no way you can backfill our positions. So we should have been the last resource that was ever used for an open border. By the way, the border could have been closed. It didn't have to stay open. So we were very upset because we knew the endangerment that was going to create for the American people.
You know, I have to circle back to something that you mentioned in the earlier segment. You talked about Benny Thompson, and I forget the name of the other gentleman that you said needs to be impeached from the TSA. But basically, Benny Thompson, that was on the J6 committee, essentially gave the orders to pull air marshals off of flights and to concentrate on white domestic terrorists. If that doesn't speak of how unnecessary the TSA is, I don't know what does. I mean, that just hit me, kind of a revelation. If you want to speak to that, you can. But that's just a thought that popped into my mind, and I'm like, that's insane. That proves your point of how ineffective this TSA is, and what a charade it is.
It is definitely a charade, Carl. Think about it. 9/11 happened. We have air marshals deployed strategically in order to thwart a hijacking for those that want to harm our country and take over an aircraft. You get one letter from Congressman Benny Thompson over to TSA David Pekoski, and our entire mission changes. How does a member of Congress have the power to write one letter to one individual who is supposed to be working under USC code, right, the federal law, to change the entire mission of the Federal Air Marshals? That is as rotten as it comes.
You know, it is. It's so sad, and you're right. Just think about that. One congressman changes the mission of the Air Marshal Service. How does a congressman have the power to do that, except that we have a bureaucracy that is absolutely corrupt and infested with left-wing radicals? And we'll get to some of the new details that have emerged with the CIA and how they started the whole Russia collusion hoax. So, I mean, it's absolutely insane where a lot of these agencies are going. You get a lot of left-wingers graduating from college, going into these agencies that seem to hate America. So it's absolutely crazy. Let me ask you about this. DEI, when it comes to the airline industry, diversity, equity, inclusion, has that impacted the Air Marshal Service? And then I want to talk to you and just in general, or get your thoughts in general about these airlines that, whether it's Southwest, whether it's United, totally kowtowing to this DEI movement. But first, your take with DEI and the Air Marshal Service.
Oh, we've been saturated with it. Let me tell you, we have been drowned with DEI. There have been official orders put out that we will hire and have 30% of DEI candidates and air marshals that are hired within a certain period of time. That is no question that's going to happen. Just recently, we had a candidate on a physical fitness test. When you come in and apply to be an air marshal, you have to do a physical fitness test. You have to run, you have to do push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups. There's certain things that you have to be active and in shape to do. This candidate could not even walk 1.5 miles. And because this candidate met the criteria for DEI, they weren't disqualified. They were allowed to continue in the process. This is happening within the Air Marshal Service as well.
You know, it's funny to me because I feel like the left doesn't want to be left out in the dust, so to speak. Like, I feel like this whole issue when it comes to racism in America, I feel like we've defeated that by and large, but the left has to bring it back because they have their party is worthless. The Democrat Party is worthless except to keep people fearful, in perpetual poverty, so on, etc. That's my take. But it's astonishing to me that these people aren't concerned about safety at all. Let me be clear too. You're not saying, listen, if a minority comes in, they can handle the criteria to become an air marshal. Obviously, they can become an air marshal, but what we're speaking of and what you're speaking of are people that can't even do what's required to basic requirements of becoming an air marshal. So we're left with people that are just there to protect us based upon their skin color or what's between their legs, as opposed to true qualifications.
I mean, Carl, they're pretty much hired. If they look on their application within the Air Marshal Service, when they look on the application and they fit the DEI criteria, they're pretty much hired then. The rest of the process is just fluff. They're going to get them through no matter what. That's the sad part about it. And these are the individuals that are supposed to thwart a hijacking but can't run 1.5 miles. It's absolutely insane to be trying to push this type of agenda within TSA at the Federal Air Marshal Service.
In your opinion, are there any nefarious reasons for doing this beyond just the racial element? It seems to me that the racial element is just a distraction from something else the left wants to do.
Well, it's very nefarious. I mean, the individual, our Office of Chief Counsel at TSA, her name is Francine Kerner. She is a leftover from Whitewater. She is actually the attorney that leaked information about the Whitewater investigation outside of the investigators. They actually had Senate hearings on her. This is the lady that's in charge of entire TSA through our Chief Counsel's office. So what do you think her political motives are?
Astonishing. Let me get to this. We have just a couple of minutes left, and I want to address a couple of things with you. First, Matt Walsh wrote a column for the Daily Wire after it was announced, but there are plans to reduce the number of white males in aviation. He reveals the troubling internal footage of FAA discussion on the DEI agenda. I should have had that video ready, but I'm sure some of you guys saw the video where literally the FAA director just wanted more minorities to become airline pilots, basically from baggage handler to pilot. And I don't know about you, but that scares the crud out of me, Sonya. Your take.
Listen, I'm with you, Carl. Are you kidding me? When a person's brain has no color, right? If you're able to function and do the job, your skin color has nothing to do with your ability. Sure. I agree our workforce should mirror our community, right? But we should not lower a standard for that to happen. And if you can meet the standard, you should get the job. It should have nothing to do with your skin color or your gender. It should do with your brain and your capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, it well said. It's so I sit there and honestly, I don't want to think about getting on a flight. And it's just true. You go on a flight, you see a woman, you see a black male, and I'm like, okay, how did they get here? I don't want to think like that, but I'll be honest with you, I do. And I think most Americans do, and perhaps they might be scared to say it. We've got just 50 seconds left here. You became an Air Marshal whistleblower. Why?
Well, I became an Air Marshal whistleblower way back in 2010 because I saw the corruption here in the Orlando field office. There were some horrific things that happened. We had several employees that committed suicide because of the pressure that was exuded on them by these horrible, horrific managers. So at that point, I said, I'm going to speak out, and I'm never, ever going to allow anyone else to feel like they need to commit suicide to get out of a bad situation who is a colleague of mine within the government.
Man, well, God bless you for doing that. Guys, real quick, where can people find you, Sonya?
I'm on Twitter. You can find me, my last name, Labosco Sonya, or you can also find us at the airmarshalnc.com. Send us an email. Would love to hear from people.
We'll leave it there. We'll be back in a few. Welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. Again, right now we're watching video. Earlier in the week, you guys, I'm sure you've heard the news that there was a shooting that occurred at the Kansas City Chiefs parade that they were having, and what you're watching here are a couple of heroic fans that are tackling one of the shooters. And sadly, I believe there were 10 to 15 people that were injured, and at least one person that was shot and killed as a result of these thugs literally firing rounds in broad daylight and in the middle of a large crowd. I mean, but it just goes to show you this is where the criminal element is nowadays in this era. It's absolutely scary. I feel like criminals have become emboldened, and it's just scary times that we're living through. But we wish the victims nothing but the best. Our prayers and thoughts are with them. And sadly and tragically, there was one victim that was killed. And I'm just a sad state of affairs. So I was glad to see those fans come to the rescue to make sure that these thugs wouldn't get away with firing rounds. And apparently it wasn't a terrorist threat or terrorist type situation. It was just thugs. They were criminals. And so just a sad state of affairs all around. Speaking of a sad state of affairs, earlier in the week, there was a report that revealed that a serious, quote unquote, Russian military threat that had our leaders scrambling. So this is a report according to the Daily Wire. And you guys may have heard or seen Mike Turner, Representative Mike Turner of the House Intelligence Committee, come out earlier in the week to talk about this threat, but I'm just going to read you some of the summary, and then I want to let you in on what's really going on and why American people should be concerned. Guys, listen, if we're going to take back this country, if there is going to be any type of retribution, and I understand retribution isn't a popular word, it's a dirty word. A lot of conservatives don't want to hear it. A lot of Americans, perhaps, that think that life is all hunky-dory and we're living with the same type of politicians in power that we've always seen in America, and that can be, that's so far from the truth. It's absolutely unbelievable. We are living in scary times. I'm one of these people. I want retribution. I want retribution for the COVID lockdowns. I want retribution. And when I say retribution, retribution. You know what I mean? I mean justice. I want the rule of law to be applied equally to every single American. I don't care what job you have. I don't care if you're in the political position, but that's not what's happening in America. So I'm going to talk to you about this Russian military threat. And what I'm going to do is connect the dots over the next couple of segments, because we should be absolutely terrified of the intelligence community inside of the United States. You guys have seen me interview whistleblowers, FBI whistleblowers like Kyle Seraphin and Steve Friend earlier in the show, Sonya Labosco, an Air Marshal whistleblower. Guys, our intelligence communities are out of control. Carl, what is our intelligence communities have to do with this latest supposed Russian military threat? I'll get into that, but first let me give you some of the summary here. The Russian military is reportedly working on developing a nuclear weapon and that will be deployed in space, that is being designed to wipe out entire Western satellite networks and knock out communications and military targeting systems. This according to U.S. intelligence agencies. So you had House Intelligence Committee Chairman Mike Turner, who happens to be a Republican from Ohio. He sounded off on this and warned that in a message that he sent to members of Congress, that the committee has, quote, identified an urgent matter with regard to a destabilizing foreign military capability that should be known by all congressional policymakers, quote, unquote. Turner said in a statement that while all House members are able to view some of the information about the, quote, serious national security threat, close quote, he wants Biden to, quote, declassify all information relating to this threat so that Congress, the administration, and our allies can openly discuss the actions necessary to respond to this threat, close quote. Now, you might be saying, good job, Representative Mike Turner, but I suspect more is at foot, which I'll get into shortly. ABC News also reported that the nuclear weapon would not be deployed against targets on Earth, but rather is designed to target satellites. This is what I mentioned earlier. I do have a question that some of you, I'm sure, are asking as well. What about the southern border? What about the open border and the northern border? We got more news this week that the northern border is actually seeing an influx of illegal immigration, border crossers. What about that? What if somebody was to walk into our country? What if they were to somehow disrupt our communications or the grid, or military systems? Could somebody walking through an open border cause that type of damage? I suspect they could. Obviously, it wouldn't be, space. They wouldn't be targeting satellites in space, but they could do all the other stuff. This is absolutely astonishing to me, which, again, I'll break this down in just a sec. So ABC News reported that the nuclear weapon would not be deployed against targets on Earth. A source familiar with the intelligence told the network that the development was, quote, very concerning and very sensitive, close quote, and was a big deal. Yeah, I suspect that is a big deal. The New York Times even reported that the weapon was still being developed and had not yet been deployed into space. The information is so sensitive that, quote, it could not be declassified without cutting off its source. An anonymous source. Go figure. Members of Congress who saw the intelligence told various publications that the threat was extremely serious, but it was not something that the U.S. public should be worried about at the moment. Then I'm curious, why bring it up now? House Speaker Mike Johnson said, we're going to work together to address this matter as we do all sensitive matters that are classified, he says. But we just want to assure everyone steady hands are at the wheel, close quote. Which hands, Speaker Mike Johnson? Are we talking about Biden's steady hands? The man that can't seem to remember when his son Bo died and how he died? What steady hands? You had National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said from the White House that the reported Russian capability represented a, quote, serious national security threat, close quote. He said, I reached out earlier to this week to the Gang of Eight to offer myself up for a personal briefing to the Gang of Eight. And in fact, we scheduled a briefing for House members of the Gang of Eight tomorrow. That was earlier in the week, by the way. And he went on to say, Sullivan did, the national security advisor, that's been on the books. So I am a bit surprised that Congressman Turner came out publicly today in advance of a meeting on the books for me to go sit with him alongside our intelligence and defense professionals tomorrow, close quote. Really, you were surprised by that? Are you guys surprised that an establishment Republican is working with the Democrat Party, in essence, to secure Ukraine funding? Because that's what this is about. Biden's bad foreign policy has he has a bad track record, right? We all know this. I mean, from the China aggression to the Russia-Ukraine aggression to the Iranian-backed terrorists, by the way, that he helped fund, their attacks on the Middle East and attacks on Israel specifically. All of this is a result of Biden, and we know that our foreign policy is in disarray thanks to Joe Biden and his administration, including Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, and it all started with that disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. We all saw the Chinese balloon traverse across the country. So now I want to get to this. What's really behind this, guys? There's a whole lot more behind this than you would suspect. I want to try to connect the dots for you, if you will, when it comes to this latest so-called Russian threat. And it's amazing, again, how these people are not concerned. These establishment people in Washington, D.C., on both sides of the aisle, seem to be so lackluster when it comes to our open southern border and even our northern border. But when it comes to this Russian military threat, Russia, whom, by the way, was not a threat under the former President Donald Trump, Russia who was becoming an increasingly weak nation. I mean, especially when we became energy independent and dominant in the United States of America under the leadership of former President Donald Trump, when Russia wasn't selling our oil to some of our NATO allies because we stopped drilling, or we stopped the whole drill baby drill notion after Donald Trump left office. I mean, this is absolutely insane. So what's at foot? Another thing, I guess, before I get started, I guess I should mention that the House Intelligence Committee Chairman Mike Turner, again, a Republican, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, something that they didn't mention, since this Russian military threat is such a serious threat, I guess that takes white domestic terrorism off the table. It's funny how that's no longer a threat, right? Very interesting. Very interesting. All right. So now what we have both, in my opinion, two parties working together to try to start a national panic. Why would Jake Sullivan, Democrat, National Security Advisor, why would House Intelligence Committee Chairman Mike Turner, Republican from Ohio, all of a sudden warn us about this serious Russian military threat? And by the way, isn't this common sense? Isn't this something that we should be aware of? Isn't this something that we should be aware of from China as well? Threats to our satellites, threats to our grid. Why is this new? I'll talk about that when we get back. Carl Jackson for SNC. We'll be back in a few. Welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. Guys, please remember to follow me on all things social media. At the Carl Jackson Show is where you can find me, or just at Carl Jackson Show. I'm on X, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Truth Social, and Getter. Wherever I am on social media, the Carl Jackson Show is where you can find me. And if you would consider subscribing to the podcast, we would certainly appreciate that. And make sure you support our sponsors. Mike Lindell, MyPillow.com is our sponsor for the day. Please support him. All you have to do is go to MyPillow.com. Click the radio podcast square, enter my name, Carl, or give them a call at 800-858-0263. Plenty of deals available to you there. All right, guys, so let's get back to what's really behind this serious Russian military threat. Is this a threat that we weren't aware of, and then all of a sudden we are aware of? You mean to tell me that our national security agencies weren't aware of this threat? They were concerned that the threat was somehow heightened right now. Is that what we're to believe? Or are there any threats concerning China? Again, no threats concerning white domestic terrorism. Is that not what's on the rise? Guys, we know what's going on. These guys are trying to stir a panic because they were unable to pass, or they want to get past this Ukraine aid. Since $61 million, the aid package was a total of $95 billion, with Israel and other nations getting a chunk of it, but Ukraine getting the bulk of it with $61 billion. So what they're trying to do is send this aid to Ukraine, and if they have to start a national panic, they'll do just that. So why are these people so desperate to send money to Ukraine? What's going on there? I'm not sure that I understand. Now, I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin. I certainly don't appreciate what he's done. But the reason why he invaded Ukraine is because he could. He invaded Ukraine because Joe Biden was in the White House. Remember, he invaded Crimea under President Biden. He did it simply because he could. So why are we sending the aid to Ukraine? Here's the truth of the matter. Here's what's really going on. Why is this threat from Russia all of a sudden popping up? All right, so there were a bunch of Republicans that were plotting to kill the reforms to FISA warrants. You know, I believe it's Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. That expires in April of this year. And so a lot of Republicans were saying, you know what, we're going to end this warrantless spying on Americans. It's time for this stuff to end. And so all of a sudden this threat from Russia becomes a major threat, and then not so much. Then maybe we shouldn't end this FISA threat. Maybe we need to keep sending money to Ukraine. Guys, the real threat is not Russia. I'm sorry to tell you. Listen, it is sad. It is horrifying. Vladimir Putin, let me be emphatically clear. He's an evil despot, and we all know it, and we've known it all along. Joe Biden knew it when he sat there and watched Vladimir Putin gather nearly his entire army up on the Ukraine border in order to invade, and Joe Biden did nothing about it. Our NATO allies did absolutely nothing about it. It's almost as if Joe Biden wanted Vladimir Putin to attack Ukraine because Joe Biden wanted to be a wartime president. And that's exactly what's happening now. These people have nothing else to run on. They have nothing to run on. No good economy. The nation is as divided as ever. Our workforces are filled with cultural Marxism, with DEI and CRT, whether you're talking about academia, or whether you're talking about airlines. It is absolutely insane. These people, racial division is absolutely off the charts. The real threat inside of this country, sadly, are our intelligence communities and establishment politicians such as Jake Sullivan and such as, I'm sad to say it, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Mike Turner. This is a sad state of affairs. The biggest threat right now to the United States of America, besides the open borders, are these establishment politicians, including Republicans and the intel community. Now, Politico and the mainstream media all try to scare us as well, and they reported earlier that by using Section 702 of FISA, they were able to thwart a legitimate terrorist attack earlier or this year or towards the latter part of last year. Wow, that's absolutely fascinating. So again, because we've been told that it's white domestic terrorists that we have to fear. But after the fake hysteria over the Russia GOP and congressmen fighting for reforms to FISA, all of a sudden, you guys know this. I'm not sure if you know this, but all of a sudden, Speaker Mike Johnson pulled the reforms that they were trying to put in play when it comes to FISA. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? You have, again, Representative Mike Turner reveals a serious Russian military threat, and the leaders of both parties begin scrambling. You have Hakeem Jeffries out there. Man, it is paramount, and I'm paraphrasing here, it's paramount to fund Ukraine. Let me read part of a column from the Federalist that appeared in the Federalist. There are actually two great columns in the Federalist. One is entitled "Report: CIA Started Russia Collusion Hoax by Asking Foreign Governments to Spy on the Trump Campaign." And there's another one, by John Daniel Davidson, in which I want to read part of this to you. And I'm going to pick up at a letter in a later part of the column, but it says here, it doesn't take a conspiracy theorist to figure out what happened here. Speaking of Speaker Johnson pulling the bill and canceling Congress for the rest of the week when they were going to take up reforms to FISA. All right. So he says, picks up here, doesn't take a conspiracy theorist to figure out what happened here. Our intelligence agencies don't want lawmakers getting in the way of their plans. They don't want any interruption in the flow of U.S. tax dollars to Ukraine. And they don't want any curbs on their ability to spy on Americans. That's interesting. Now, remember, Joe Biden was doing some dirt in Ukraine. He and his son, Hunter Biden, he was using his son, Hunter Biden, to enrich the family. You had Tony Bobolinsky, again, come out and a business partner of Joe Biden and say that Joe Biden enabled his family members to make money off of foreign investors, if you will. The article goes on. He says the irony here is that the U.S. intelligence community itself has become a far greater threat to our republic than Russia or any other country. As journalists Michael Schellenberger, Matt Taibbi, and Alex Gutentag reported, the CIA asked foreign intelligence agencies to spy on more than 24 Trump associates as early as 2015 and share the intelligence that they acquired. This surveillance operation would later be used to launch the Crossfire Hurricane investigation and craft the Russia collusion hoax. The CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. This gets even more crazy. Until now, the report says, the official story has been that the FBI's investigation began after Australian intelligence officials told U.S. officials that a Trump aide had boasted to an Australian diplomat that Russia had damning material about Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. But in fact, what the report alleges is that U.S. intelligence agencies tasked the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, the 5 members of the so-called Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, to surveil 26 Trump associates identified by President Barack Obama, CIA Director John Brennan. So here we thought it was Australia that started this whole, that started this collusion hoax. All right. Again, let me read that over. Until now, the official story has been that the FBI's investigation began after Australian intelligence officials told U.S. officials that a Trump aide had boasted to an Australian diplomat that Russia had damning material about Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. We thought that's where it started. That's what we were told. But it wasn't. It didn't start in Australia. It started with our own intelligence agencies. What was the purpose? John Daniel Davidson writes, the purpose of this surveillance wasn't to discover whether Trump associates were colluding with Moscow. It was to make contacts and create interactions with those people through the Five Eyes agencies and then report those contacts to the FBI as suspicious, thus establishing a pretext for the FBI Crossfire Hurricane investigation. He goes on to say, as we all know, Crossfire Hurricane notoriously abused FISA to spy on Trump associates, to say nothing of its ultimate purpose, which was to destroy Trump's candidacy and failing that his presidency. So let's not get distracted, guys, by what the establishment in Washington, D.C. are trying to do with this hysteria over this latest Russian threat. The real threats, sadly, to the United States of America are Joe Biden and his administration that sits in the White House. Sadly, our intelligence communities that, in my opinion, many of whom, including the FBI, that need to be dismantled. But also the establishment. And sadly, we're seeing that on both sides of the aisle. So let's not get distracted by the latest fear mongering in Washington, D.C. Guys, I appreciate you tuning in to this edition of the Carl Jackson Show. Don't grow weary, doing good. God bless.